Right. Till Dr. Arul is coming in, I think he went outside to take a call. I'll start with you, Mr. Joshi. You were here last year also on the same panel on offshore wind. And very happy to have you again here. If you can just reiterate for our audience, what is ONGC's plan in offshore wind, or what sort of, I know everyone is still exploring and looking at what to do, but if you can just highlight what is the kind of initiative that you are planning.
Good morning all. Thank you, Kushbu. ONGC has a target of achieving 10 gigawatt RE capacity by 2030, and we intend to have net zero by 2038 for scope 1 and scope 2. We have a plan to spend around $12 billion by 2030. We wish to maintain our share in the energy business, and for that, renewable is a very important aspect. And in renewables, we are looking for solar, wind, offshore wind, green hydrogen. Offshore wind becomes very attractive to us because we have some competence of operating projects, of developing projects in offshore, and we also are operating around 153 megawatt of onshore wind, and we constructed that also. We have specialization or capabilities in the field of geotechnical, geophysical surveys. Surveys are very, very critical for assessing the conditions of the seabed and for design of the foundations. So that gives us an edge, and we have deep pockets. So this is an area where we can take lead. So that is why ONGC is planning to have 500 megawatt offshore wind by 2030 and another 500 megawatt by 2035. But this all depends on how the tenders are coming into a market. There is a delay, but we expect that policymakers will bring out suitable conditions in the tenders, whether for seabed lease or the recently announced 1 gigawatt tender in Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. So we are looking forward to offshore wind, and we want to be the leader in this area, in this country.
Have you also participated in the recent, or are you planning to participate in the recent tender?
Yes. In fact, we have signed a MOU with NTPC, and our joint venture formation is on the way. We have got some approvals and still one is pending. So we'll be joining hands with NTPC to participate in all these tenders.
Okay.
It will be a 50-50% joint venture, because as I told you, we have that offshore experience and they have the power experience, so that makes a suitable combination.
Right. Thank you. I'll come to you, Dr. Arul. Similar question for you. Are you at all looking at offshore wind as an area of investment? If yes, then what kind of plans do you have in place? I know it's very early, but still, if you can...
Yeah, I think we...
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. So I think, we have spent a lot of time on offshore wind, analyzing offshore wind for almost a year or so. And of course, this is a fairly big change. So we were actively looking for partners, international partners who have executed offshore wind projects to tie up with and go together. Right? So I think that was our plan of action. So in terms of offshore wind, see, the way we were looking at it is because this seabed lease seemed to be the one that would come online faster. It appeared that way, but again, the way we were looking at seabed lease was, see, one of the advantages with offshore wind is the continuous nature of the power. So if you are looking at it purely as a replacement for solar or a replacement for wind, it's not going to be competitive at all, right? And in the seabed lease tender, we didn't have a VGF as well, right? So under such circumstances, what is the best approach? And we were looking at it more as a battery replacement rather than a wind or solar replacement, right? And especially in Tamil Nadu, I think the power is almost continuous. I think Gujarat is not as good as Tamil Nadu, but on the coast of Tamil Nadu. So we were looking at it primarily, but even there, I think the tariffs have to be viable. So that 5 rupees, 5.5 rupees, which is a viable tariff where I could take a seabed lease and then go to the market and find a consumer, right? So that is still not viable today also in the marketplace. So I think that's a concern, but we were definitely, we are and we were very, very actively scouting, but see, ultimately we are a PE operated fund.
Right.
So commercial viability becomes the primary driver for any decisions. But I think that's kind of where we are.
Okay. I'll come to you, Mr. Singh. As a consultant and very different sort of experience and background compared to the other two panelists, are your clients or are the people that the companies that you're advising, are they actively looking at offshore wind right now? Some of the developers that you might be working with, or some of the other PSUs, etc., that you're working with, are they actively exploring offshore wind as an option in the nearby future?
Hi. So ONGC happens to be one of our clients, so that perspective has been
So that's
given
not
already.
counted, other clients.
Yeah. So what happened was, once the initial development started, there was a momentum. There were a lot more companies interested, a lot more MOUs were getting signed, and JVs were starting to get formed up. After that, it remained slow. The tender didn't come out. So that was a worry, because then those investors, they started to lose interest, and the uncertainty kicked in. Now after the seabed leasing one and after VGF announcement, so we again see that activity now happening. Over the last few years, what we have been doing is we have been trying to look at the entire value chain, because as has been discussed, offshore happens to be it's a capital intensive solution. It would require a clear path to market, which evidently was not there. But a lot more things would have to fall into place in terms of port availability, in terms of logistics, supply chain, in terms of grid interconnection. And there has been some activity or some interest throughout that. So although supply chain remains concentrated, almost 99 or almost 100% of it is with Europe or with APEC. But throughout all of those other components in the value chain, there has been some activity happening. So for example, in terms of vessel availability, we know it's going to be a constraint given jack-up vessels or heavy lifting vessels remain limited, remain booked for a long time. But there has been that intent to specifically see in terms of what all would have to happen. But VGF, we feel, has been a very positive announcement, given the higher capital cost and given the drivers that would be needed to bring the cost down.
Right. I'll come to you, Mr. Joshi. He spoke about some things, some positive steps that have taken place in the last year to sort of give a boost to this segment, and we've had a policy since 2015 and EOI in 2018. So can you highlight maybe one or two very big positives that have happened in the past 1.5 years that you feel are finally going to give the boost that this segment requires? Or what's so different this time that was not there before?
See, one positive aspect is that the government is quite supportive, and they have come out with the VGF, which is very much required, because the per megawatt cost in case of offshore is somewhere in the range of 21 to 25 crores. It is almost 3 times that of onshore. So here VGF is a must, and I feel it needs to be further enhanced so that we get a LCOE that will make it competitive to the other sources. The other aspect is the availability of data, the wind resource assessment. So in Gujarat, NIWE had put one LIDAR and the data is available, and now recently I think they have put 3 more LIDARs in Tuticorin area in south, so that we have proper wind resource assessment and the energy yield or energy generation can be calculated properly, because these are huge investments. So we need to have accurate data for predicting the generation of energy. So these are 2 good developments. And third aspect, ports are going to play a very, very important role for offshore wind or even for green hydrogen. So government has given some grant to ports, around 600 crores, I think, for 2 ports. But I feel there are around 5 ports which requires to be upgraded, and each of them will be seeking an investment of around $75 to $100 million in the time span of 2 to 3 years. So these are some good developments, but we are looking for more clarity in the tender, so that with transparent conditions and with lucrative conditions, with some more incentives, fiscal incentives, this will happen fast.
Right. Dr. Arul, do you want to add any other positive development that has
I
happened?
I think the VGF is definitely attractive, but as I said, that 6.8 crores would probably still not get you to 3 rupees or 3. Maybe it'll get you to 5.5 or 6 rupees. And if we view it in, I don't know if there is a tariff limit on that VGF tender. So I think if there's some flexibility, it's possible to make it work on a RTC approach with that kind of a VGF, right? So that's encouraging. I think, see, one of the challenges in India is the Indian offshore wind speeds are not that high compared to the international wind speeds, right? And internationally also, we know the offshore wind story. It's not a very positive story for the turbine manufacturers.
Right. We will come to some of those challenges later.
Okay, fine.
I
So
was talking
my
about
point is,
the
so what they
plus
had
point.
done in Dhanushkodi is they've already given, set up one location for a wind turbine manufacturers to set up a turbine which is more tuned for our wind speeds, and they can establish the turbine, right? I think that is also one good development, because that is also required for validating the turbines per se.
Right. Coming, Dr. Arul, again to you, you've worked in, I mean, your company does work in onshore wind as well, and we are seeing how offtake is a challenge there. And you've spoken yourself about how tariffs are going to play a big role here. So how does that play into offshore wind? Do you think, I mean, offtake is going to be a major issue, even when we have VGF, even when we have, will Indian consumers be willing to pay that kind of a...
See, that's what I told earlier also, right? So my view is that for RTC structure, I think there is a role for it, right? I think at 5, I think especially with this VGF, I think we may be able to reach those levels, right? And as long as there isn't, because VGFs generally come with a tariff ceiling also. I've not seen that, of course, that doesn't come in the budget announcement, that comes elsewhere. Right, so I think maybe it's marginal, but sir said we may need more to bring it down. I have not run the numbers, but at 5.56 maybe this particular VGF can get us there. And if we can find the RTC customer, even Tamil Nadu, in fact I met Tanjit co-chairman, I think Rajesh, he was saying that but 5.5 he could potentially take the offtake. Right. So of course the other challenge of course is transmission lines. That also the government has asked the CTUAL to do the work, because that is a significant investment, and I think enabling that also is one more enabler of support.
Right. Mrs. Singh, coming to you, we've discussed a fair bit on VGF, and so there was also some discussion around how this VGF needs to be enhanced. So in your studies or in your, reports, have you come out with what should be that enhancement, or what, if it should be done in tranches, or I mean, what is your or PwC's sort of recommendation on that?
Sure. So one thing that there is a consensus on is a lot more needs to happen for
Right.
this to becoming a faster and this to becoming a more uh, commercially viable. Uh, VGF is one option, VGF is one mode to do so. There are other options also. So when we look at, for example, incentivization for anything, so one happens to be the direct incentive, could be VGF or a PLI, or could be GBI or anything. There are other things also, for example, looking at benefits in terms of regulatory levies, in terms of exemptions that could be offered, specifically for open access projects. We are currently focusing a lot more on utility sales,
Right.
which makes sense given a larger scale, but last couple of years we've also been emphasizing a lot on open access
Right.
viability of such projects, wherein some relaxations would definitely help. The second part is looking at taxation, so direct tax or indirect tax on any of these. If, I mean, there could be some decisions taken in terms of exemption around, let's say GST or around custom duties. So various things would have to be looked at apart from VGF. VGF given guidelines, it shouldn't be more than 40%. So there would be a specific number.
Right.
Beyond that, it would be tough to look at VGF primarily. But when we did that modeling, factoring in VGF, our assessment and analysis has been similar to what has been indicated. So close to 5.5 to 6 rupees in Tamil Nadu. Gujarat, I mean, with the same level of VGF would have a higher tariff given a lower wind speed. And that for Tamil Nadu also we did that for zone B. So we feel a lot more has to happen.
Has to happen.
Having said that, we often try to assess viability of say offshore wind with onshore wind. While the mindset has to change a bit, it has to be, for example, looked at not so from onshore wind to offshore wind comparison, but also from example an offshore wind to let's say an FDRE comparison. So FDRE gives it, I mean, the highest
Right.
UF much more benefit. But over there also close to 5 something is utilities are open to shelling out. So yeah, that mindset change also has to be there.
Right. Mr. Singh, again, back to you. So, when we talk about incentives, wind sector initially had FITs, it had generation-based incentives, it had accelerated depreciation, a lot of these things. Do you think some of these things could hold some merit here? I don't know.
So if we look at developments globally, let's say we look at China. China currently has, I mean, a major control over supply chain as well as the major deployment that's happening. So China initially also supported projects with VVGF sort of mechanisms only. From a developer standpoint also, something that resonates more is VGF, given it's outright, given it's very clearly laid out and leads to a direct capex reduction in a way. So VGF has been the first and foremost requirement that's there, but it has been only announced for the initial first project in a way only for 1 gigawatt. So can be looked at for a longer pipeline also.
Right. Mr. Joshi, supply chain globally has been a very big issue, especially in offshore wind. We've seen projects, big projects by very big developers sort of being stalled or cancelled or, pushed back. So in this sort of a, global situation, how ready or prepared or unprepared are we as a Indian wind industry to, take off offshore wind at this time? We also spoke about marine, vessels not being available and all of those things. So taking that into consideration.
See, if we see the total installed capacity of offshore wind, it is around 70-75 gigawatt. And it is expected to increase tenfold by 2040 to around 750 gigawatt levels. So the ecosystem needs to be developed in the same pace. And for us, the problem is that until I have a clear-cut pipeline of projects, I cannot plan my things. As Weber rightly said, availability of installation vessels and barges, it is going to be the major challenge. And you cannot book it if you don't have projects in hand. So that is a very critical aspect. Another aspect is even availability of vessels for geotechnical surveys, because these geotechnical surveys will be different from the normal geotechnical service, as the soil data is required to be tested very meticulously, because the load here is because of the wind on the structures. In ONGC, we have our own vessel for geotechnical surveys, but that will not be suitable for projects where we are installing wind turbines, 120-meter height and wind speeds, huge wind speeds. So these two things are going to be a challenge. China, as he rightly said, they are almost approaching 40 gigawatt, because they have developed the ecosystem or supply chain is that much controlled that the progress is very fast. But here we have to develop everything. Presently, in the beginning, all equipments will be imported, because we have to indigenize the capacities here for some parts, but that will take time. So definitely, but again, as I said, you need a clear-cut vision of projects coming down the line, and the economy of scale will only be a key factor. So supply of chain needs to be monitored, but question is, first project should come and then more to follow.
Dr. Arul, I'm sure you have and your team has looked at more successful markets and what kind of projects are coming up there. So in your analysis, in your preliminary studies, how do our policies compare with, let's say Germany or UK or, other?
It's probably the biggest one, right? Yeah. Scotland especially, yeah, that area is
But
quite
a lot of
big,
your
yeah.
investors come from.
Yeah, I know, I
Market.
know. So we see the viability of tariff is always different, right? Because those markets have a different cost structure in terms of cost of capital.
Hmm.
So obviously, and the tariffs affordability, right? So it's
Hmm.
difficult to say something happened in UK, so it has to happen in India, and it could be viable at the same levels of support. I think probably it will not be correct, right?
But what about the policies or the tender mechanisms that they have, and which
So
may
honestly, I'm not up to speed
Okay.
on it. Yeah, I'll be honest on that part.
Okay.
I'm not up to speed on that.
All right. Mrs. Singh, would you like to comment on what's happening globally in terms of policy in this space, and how does India compare?
So, India is just making strides now. The initial set of documents are only getting developed. Uh, what has happened and what has happened well in other countries is, firstly, that supply chain has integrated well in a manner. For example, we had visited ports in Denmark and Netherlands, Eichberg, IM7 and others. So those ports have been much better prepared because they have seen significant deployment already. But what we are also seeing is, with wind turbine sizes also going up, many have started to face those constraints as well. Same also happens to be the case with vessels again. Some of the heavy lifting vessels, even with, let's say, 10 megawatt plus size wind turbines, they would still face constraints. So, but those countries have an ecosystem that's there, which needs to be developed here in India. How that got developed was, for example, through incentives, through FITs, and primarily through permitting, which was done in a very standardized manner. That part still remains very open here in India. The concern on that is, while we are going to be looking at a tariff, if anyone is going to be modeling a tariff, capex is only one bit. So you take a project size, then you look at operational parameters, you look at generation, CUF and others. Subsequently, there is an uncertainty that comes in, so that risk-reward question comes into picture. So if there is a higher certainty on these projects being successful in that given time frame, it's going to be a lot more competitive. Otherwise, what's going to happen is, given uncertainties being there, there would be a higher IRR that would be targeted, which would also subsequently lead to a higher tariff. So a lower tariff has to come in through, for example, a technology cost that has to be lower. Eventually, that would happen through more localization once it starts to happen more in India. CUF you probably would not have much control over, but other stuff in terms of permitting, if that can be done in a very standardized manner, it would definitely help the sector.
Right. Mr. Joshi, you want to add? Yeah,
See,
yeah.
actually, one of the things, interesting things in this is, I know we always say ROW in the wind, right? But here also there is and in fact, some Scottish people were talking about the fishermen issue, right? And how do you manage that, right? I think so. First, you have to help them different skill sets, and how you engage them so that they don't feel there is a livelihood risk, and also the whole fishing areas are not impacted, right? I think that's another area. I think some of them have really worked on it and worked out that integration of the fishermen along with the wind turbines, because that's a very critical aspect to make this work.
Right, right. Mr. Joshi, the current tender, what are maybe the few negatives of this RFP? Why is it not, I mean, it was earlier planned for May, I think. It's now been pushed down to August. And I think I was speaking with someone yesterday from GWEC who said it might be pushed down further. So what are some of the, points where it's not generating the results as expected, in your view?
See, it is a question of cost and policy. They have kept such a huge seabed leasing fee that people are not willing to come forward. First of all, you are moving to an area where there are a lot of risks. So you need to be compensated or make assured that yes, you will get all benefits. So these needs to be incorporated. And you rightly said, whatever incentives were given to wind, onshore wind in the beginning, they are required to be given to these projects also, whether it is GBI or accelerated depreciation. These are required to be given, and many concessions are required on import aspects. Tax waivers are required, then the waivers given for ISTS, open access, these are required to be carried out. And another thing is that for us it was a problem. They have kept certain conditions, like if you come as a consortium, you need to have 51% as the lead partner. But for PSUs, the problem is that if I invest more than 50%, then it becomes a subsidiary. So it becomes a sort of a government company. So we have given some suggestions to modify these things, and they are considering. They had several rounds of stakeholder interaction, and we hope that maybe within next 3 months, they will be coming out with fresh conditions or with more relaxed conditions.
Right. I think regarding seabed leasing, there was an interesting tender in Germany which was very successful, where the concession period was so long that it made sense for them to pay it in installments. Dr. Arul, any comments on the tender?
See, one thing we were pushing was, see, the time frame for execution, right? I know it's not, because I think it will take 2 or 3 years to just get the basic data to start the work, right? So I think, and then post that there is a few years, right? I think the time frame of execution was something we were pushing in the change in the tender. And the second is the ports. I think the ports part is addressed now, but I think the time frame has to be longer.
Right, right.
For people to be comfortable.
Mrs. Singh, I know a lot of thoughts have already been addressed, but if there's something that the panelists missed and you would like to talk about the tender, which you think is...
So, apart from the incentive, one thing is an absolute policy clarity also has to be there, and commitment has to be there. For example, if we look at the offshore tendering pipeline, that's redundant now. Those numbers don't make any sense now. That has to be revised. Same way when the first tender came in, after that nothing happened for a long time. VGF has taken a long time. So once a call has been taken to support this sector, that has to be done with a very firm commitment that, okay, this would be done by this much time frame. coming on to the tender part, so given that these would be the first set of projects, there has to be a bit more flexibility and bit more comfort that has to be offered. Traditionally, I mean, tendering authorities, they tend to be a lot more rigid in terms of, let's say, commissioning timelines. A lot more uncertainty is there, so there has to be some comfort in terms of exigencies because of reasons outside of probably your control. With PLI also, what we see is, I mean, PLI is a good example. Should there be a, for example, a delay in commissioning, so there is a very strict penalty attached to it. With these initial set of projects, there has to be some comfort given.
Right.
Also on the permitting and standardization part, so mode 1, it would still appear a bit more straightforward. However, for seabed leasing and other more projects, we feel a lot more can still happen. A lot of responsibility we feel has been laid on to the developer. Some of it has to be taken care of by specific agencies, and that has to be done in an end-to-end manner, not subsequently just designating an agency and then seeing that things are not moving, but rather that agency has to be empowered in a manner that they can get it done in due time frame.
Do you think the grid will be ready to sort of take up the first projects that come up? Like we've seen the projects come up, the grid and the power evacuation is not there. So do you think the kind of grid that's required, we heard some statistics yesterday about the cost of interconnectors and all of those things. So do you think that will be ready by the time the first sort of projects come up?
That we have seen to be a concern, not just for offshore projects, but also for grid-connected on-ground projects also. Even for parks, we saw projects, I mean, having that concern with availability, transmission, evacuation part not getting ready in time. So here, I mean, the interaction that we have had with GETCO, for example, we feel they at least are geared up for the evacuation part on their end. Post that, I mean, how things would pan up, I mean, only time will tell.
Right. Mr. Joshi, different question for you. How does green hydrogen factor in your plans along with offshore wind? Are you looking at offshore wind to produce green hydrogen and that sort of an ecosystem?
See, green hydrogen is an important element of our strategy. We intend to have 1 million metric tons ammonia production by 2030 and another same capacity by 2035. But again, offshore wind and green hydrogen, they are almost at the same stage, at a nascent stage where they require a lot of support. We have plans to put up green hydrogen or green ammonia plants along with the offshore wind turbines so that the export can be done easily. So that is in our plan, but the thing is that first let offshore wind happen. And green ammonia will parallelly come by, it will also be ready by 2028, 2029, not before that. So this is a good option that we are considering. But again, first let's have the offshore wind and definitely we'll go for this option also.
Right. Dr. Arul, any other challenge? I know you were speaking a little bit about challenges there and I sort of cut you off. If you want to highlight them, now would be the time.
No, I think, as I said, the wind speeds in India are different. They're not as high as what is there elsewhere in the world. So you have to develop a turbine which is more suited for our wind speeds. And I think that is, while the test bed has been made available, but that turbine development, at least I have not seen a significant progress in that area. I think because to take a turbine for a very high wind speed and deploy it is neither optimal nor effective, right? I think that's one area I said. In terms of your transmission, I don't think transmission can happen faster than the wind turbine. So I don't think they will be behind once they have a mandate to do. So the wind will be the turbine and the execution will be the issue. The other one is the whole environmental approval piece. Right? You're going to deal with multiple agencies.
Also the defense approval and all of that.
Maritime approvals and so many other things, right? So this also, just the environmental study itself, right? It's going to take 2 or 3 years. So I think people are not undermining the efforts, right, that is required. That's why we are trying to impress on the government also. I can't start testing anything on the ground until some basics. Of course, the wind speed now, Naive masters there. Otherwise, they were going to get some maritime data and compile it and give us an indicative profile. But again, that is not the same as having a mast. We all know that, right? So this environmental approvals, to me, the turbine that's suited for our environment, I think these two are critical.
And what about manpower availability?
Skill manpower is, see, even with the current wind scaling, we are finding that even for onshore wind, there is a challenge in getting the trained manpower. And again, here there are 2 or 3 things. One is, as I said, like the offshore capabilities like ONGC, they have the ability to work offshore. But in terms of onshore, but in terms of the turbine, in terms of the whole the training, for people who are able to work offshore, right? So the turbine itself is to me, it's a sort of even onshore we have the same challenge. When a new turbine comes, there are not enough trained people to maintain it, right? And then it requires in fact, we have to make efforts almost 2 years ahead to get a skilled workforce who can maintain the turbine prior to the warranty period ends, and your dependence on OEMs is very high.
Right.
And given many of their situations, I think it's very tricky, right? So I think that part is a OEM specific part where you need to skill. That will come with the turbine becoming available and training, but the additional aspects of offshore, I think these are challenges.
Right. Mr. Singh, one final question to you before I move to the audience questions. There are 3 models that were, sort of put in the strategy. So out of these 3, which do you think has a better chance? Like, which avenue do you think is going to maybe succeed more than the other 2?
So there's most comfort in first one, obviously, given, the sites are there for everyone to see, and also some preparatory work that has gone into there already. The last one, if you have to identify the site and do everything on your own and not get much support from authorities, obviously there would be lesser number of takers there. So it's in that order only, the same way the roadmap has highlighted. So the most comfort has to be in
What
model
about
one.
CNI offtake in this? Do you think there is a chance for that? I know you said a little bit about it, that market is picking up, but do you think there is?
So, the only positive has been the ISTS exemption given it has been indicated and clarified for a longer time frame till 2030. So that's the only upside on that. We did some modeling for a few CNI customers. What's happening is the CUF that's going to be there, for example, let's say in Gujarat, it's not significantly higher compared to what it is for an on-ground project. So if there was, for example, an upside of, let's say, 15-20%, then in terms of having a larger...
It's not even that.
It's not that, unfortunately. Tamil Nadu, it's higher than Gujarat, but for example, for onshore, if you're targeting close to 30-35%, that's also evident, that's visible. For offshore, it's not, in Gujarat, it's not going to be 50%.
And the costs are very high.
Yes. On the cost side, there is an upside. No, not upside, I'm sorry. On cost side, there is a significant constraint. So that way, if there are, however, more relaxations offered to ensure that capacity can be augmented well for an open access customer, then the dynamics may change. But given the current market realities, it would take some time for someone to have that level of preparedness to go for open access for that project. And this also augurs well with the point Mr. Joshi mentioned. When we look at, say, for example, open access, you start also looking at green hydrogen generation with that. But that's looking at 2 technologies that are not at that level of maturity, and hoping combination of these 2 would lead to a commercially competitive project. So in global tenders, we are seeing pressure with the current solar and wind generation augmented projects, but hoping if that's not competitive, if that's not making India competitive, then hoping that offshore with a higher tariff would make it competitive, it's not going to work.